Hey everyone, welcome to another action-packed episode of ARG Presents. He's the Cadillac, John Butt of Carshaller, and I'm the Dinosaur, amigo Aaron. And this week, we're going to be discussing arcade games. Boat, what do you think about arcades?
I think arcades are pretty good, and I especially love discussing them with our third guest this week, John Marshall.
And there he is.
Hi guys.
Let's jump right into this week's game.
All right, I think I'll lead off the proceedings this week with my choice, which was Cadillacs and Dinosaurs. Now, you might be thinking to yourself, what a weird choice out of all the video games to choose from. And I chose this one. I don't know how much press this one's ever gotten, but it's one that me and my son have played over and over and over, and I've got a pretty intimate knowledge of it after all the years of playing it, and so I thought, man, this is going to be a good one. Maybe I can turn some people onto it. So this was released. A lot of places say this came out in 92, but the best I could tell, it came out in April of 1993. It's a Capcom production. They produced it. They also developed it, and it was on a weird like system board. If you know anything about Capcoms, they had CPS system board 1, 2, 3, and that was basically like an arcade console. They would release a bunch of games for 1. They'd release a bunch of games for 2. This one was somewhere between 1 and 2. This particular system board that this came out on, there wasn't a lot of games released for it. It's a beat 'em up game in the vein of a Final Fight. 1 to 3 players, and again, this one was a JAMA board. If you're in the arcade scene, it's a horizontal game. It means that the screen is turned like a normal television. So, in this game, you play one of 4 explorers, or basically heroes, that are going to thwart a bad guy who is basically using dinosaurs to create a genetic dinosaur-human hybrid. All right? Makes sense, right? I mean, it could happen. The guys you get to play in this, you've got basically 3 guys and a chick. You've got the girl is called Hannah. Have you? And I'm assuming you went through and played this a little bit. Do you have a favorite character of the bunch?
I like Mustafa.
See, I'm the same way. That's the guy I always play. So here's a rundown of who your choices. And these characters are split into like even powered. Some people are more special or hit harder. Some are quicker. Some have more life. Right. So your first guy is Jack Tenrick. Then you've got Hannah Dundee, the lady of the bunch. She's a tough broad, no doubt. Then you've got Mustafa Cairo.
Oh yeah,
that's my boy too. That's funny that you would pick the same guy. And then lastly, if I can turn this page here, you've got Mass Bradovic. Mass.
Wow.
You know he's a stud if he's named Mass. He's the muscle guy. So, what do you do in this game? Well, it's a combination of, I guess there's city fighting and there's jungle fighting and forest fighting, right? And then some building stuff. So you're one of these characters. It's your classic beat 'em up. You run through the levels and you try to beat up everyone you see. The amount of moves you can do is pretty impressive. It's got what you would expect from a say second or third generation Final Fight clone, which is effectively what it is. You can do a dash attack where you hit your joystick twice and run and do an attack. You can do punches, you can do kicks, you can do grabs, slams, defensive tactics. I mean, you've got a lot of options, and they're pretty satisfying. I mean, I think it feels like it's a pretty. I don't get bored with the options, I guess is what I'm saying. Then you've got a special attack where you will do certain maneuvers, spinning kicks or whatnot. That's supposed to basically, really, it's a defensive maneuver to get people off of it, because you will get swarmed in this game by the variety of bad guys in it. There are only 2 buttons in this, attack and jump, and then if you hit both buttons, you do your special attack. So it's pretty standard fare. If you're familiar with the Capcom beat 'em up system, you've got your life bar in the upper left-hand corner or the upper right-hand corner or the center, depending on who you're playing. And then underneath it, you'll see a life bar for your enemy, and you'll, as you beat the crap out of them, the life bar will go down. Sometimes it's yellow, which means that they're almost dead. Sometimes it's multicolors, and you have to take that lifeboat down over and over and over to kill them. The game starts off basically with your character being jumped on this rooftop by these bad guys. They're like, listen, we're going to finish you off. You've gotten to know our plans for the last time. And they basically gang attack you. And of course, your guy or girl beats the crap out of them, goes down through the building, and that's pretty much where the adventure starts. The game is unique in several ways. The dinosaur aspect of it really adds a lot. And I'll get into the whole Cadillacs and Dinosaurs universe. And yes, there is one later on. But basically, most of these games you're just fighting guys. Fat guys, thin guys, guys with weapons, blah, blah, blah. In this game, you're fighting guys, and you're also occasionally will have to tangle with dinosaurs. And the funny thing about it is this game doesn't treat the dinosaurs like bad guys. They're sort of like subjugated, or they're almost like, they're not pets. They're just like slaves, basically. These poor things are beaten down. The bad guys in this treat the dinosaurs like crap. There's one scene, I believe it's the second boss, and he's called the Butcher. And when you come upon him, he's got these two huge cleavers. He's just hacking this dinosaur up, but he doesn't give a crap. He cusses you out. And then one time, one of the bosses, the dinosaur, they just sick him on you because they beat the crap out of this stuff. They beat him to get him mad. Then they sick him on you like a guard dog. It's very weird. It's a weird, I'm guessing you picked up on it. Had you played this game before today?
No.
Had you heard of it?
I'd never. Actually, I had heard of it, but I never played it. I didn't even know that it was a beat 'em up before this past week.
Right.
I did think that it was a lot cooler than I thought it would be because of that. I figured you'd just be beating up on dinosaurs the whole game, and,
right?
But the way that they frame it, where the dinosaurs, you're trying to actually save the dinosaurs. They're being subjected to all these genetic experiments and things like that. So the dinosaurs are not the bad guys at all. It's
very strange, but it's neat. It's refreshing in a lot of ways. This game, if you've played Capcom's Aliens versus Predators, beat 'em up, I don't know if either one of you guys have played that one. This game has a lot in common with that in some ways. Graphically, it's a beautiful game. They really do an excellent job rendering these characters. Beautiful, colorful game. I think the fights in the jungle really add some flavor to it. There's some like jungle villages. There's a village you go into that's like catches on fire. That's really neat. At the end, there's these crazy labs you're going through that are really bizarre. They've done a good job making them look real. Like what happens if a crazy genius is experimenting with DNA? You get mutants and weird crap in tubes and stuff. That's really bizarre. There are several sections, too few, in my opinion, where you're actually walking through water and even fighting in water. And they're really well done. They're really cool looking. They even have, if someone drops an item, you can even see it under the water. There's sort of this shadow in the water that you could pick it up, which I thought was really neat. The bad guy in this is called Vice. He's a big, crazy, killer bad guy. That's like a doctor guy at the end. I don't want to give away the ending of this because, it really is worth going through. Did you get to go through the whole thing?
Yeah, I played through the whole thing.
The ending of it is neat, but the gimmick with the guy experimenting on these dinosaurs and humans to make hybrid creatures, it climaxes in a very interesting way. But before you get to the end of it, you'll end up fighting some of these guys that have these kind of hybrid DNA precursors to what ends up happening at the end, and it mutates you in this real weird way. Not you, but the guys you're fighting, and you have to sort of fight the same bunch of guys over and over. It works. It works pretty well. There are some scenes in between the fights where you're in your Cadillac and you're basically mowing suckers down. There's a level where you're going back to your lab and you're mowing down bad guys in your Cadillac, and there are guys behind you on like motorbikes. They're shooting like missiles at you, and so it's slowly wearing down your Cadillac. If you go long enough, you can get there, but usually you end up your Cadillac blows up and you have to fight your way the rest of the way. They remind me of the scenes in Alien vs. Predator where you're on top of the truck and you're shooting your guns off of them. If you've played that, it moves lightning quick. There's the board really was a performer in the graphics department. The action is hot and heavy in this, and they get a ton of stuff on the screen without any. I didn't notice any sort of slowdown or weirdness, in the way in the proceedings. So you could pick up a ton of crazy stuff in this. One of the weird things about this game, and again, a throwback to Alien vs. Predator, and way more in this than, say, Final Fight. Again, this is not as old. But they had refined their technique in this. And they had a bunch of crazy stuff you could pick up. I wrote down some of the nutty stuff, and this stuff's just health recovery stuff. They had and the fact that you find this stuff in the jungle or in water, I found amusing. But you could get coffee, croissants, cakes, sundaes, potatoes.
There's a lot of it's a lot of junk food.
It is. And the thing is, these people are all buff killers, so surely they would never eat this stuff. Hot dogs, pizza, lobster. Sure, why not? Lobster in there. Now, one of the things that adds a little spice to it is the weapons you can pick up.
Now, let me talk a little bit about
Okay,
this.
go ahead.
Okay. This game does guns better than any other beat 'em up I've ever played. The first time I picked up a gun and I was like, man, this feels great. I love the fact that you keep it around and you can pick up ammo for it. But it's hard to even explain why I like it so much. It's very well animated. There's sort of a recoil when you fire. I just love the way this game does weapons.
The one thing about this game, the weapons in it, a lot of the weapons are like caveman. I mean, you've got a rock you can pick up and you've got a rock, just a stick you can whack a dude with. You've got clubs. You've also got dynamite.
I never messed with any of that stuff.
Yeah.
I always just picked up the guns.
Well, I mean, you pick up what you see. There's grenades. There's knives. Again, the grenades are neat. The dynamite. I love stuff like that where you just whack a dude with that. You've got knives, torches. When you fight the butcher, again, we mentioned him whacking that dinosaur. He carries these two mean-looking, like, I don't know, scimitars
machetes or something.
And he'll whack you with, but when you hit him, he'll drop one or both of them, and you can get him and start whacking him.
That's right.
It's very satisfying to finish this guy off with one of these, because he's a real scumbag. One thing about this as well is the bad guys in this, you really want to kill them because they come across like jerks.
Yeah.
I mean, these are real scumbags.
They give you a lot of incentive to want to hate these guys.
Yeah. But the weapons, I mean, there are tons of different guns. There are shotguns, there are Uzis, there's bazookas. Anytime you get killed and you have another man, he'll come down out of the sky and bazooka shots come down and kind of clear the path, so it kind of gives you a little bit of
And the thing that I like about it, too, is that the enemies are dumb, and they will align themselves directly with you as they come across the field to you. So if you've got a gun, you don't have to worry about shooting behind them or in front of them. You're gonna hit them most of the time.
And also, something else I like about this is the guys, they can hurt each other and they can get hurt, and the obstacles can hurt them. I hate games where the guys are indestructible. They just walk through.
One of my favorite things about this game is the way the guys run in, especially these big bruiser guys. They run in like linebackers with their shoulders down.
Yeah, they'll put their shoulders down. This game has a pretty good amount of actual bad guys in it. It's not the best, but I mean, it's more than most in terms of the variety of guys. Especially, one thing I like is they add different guys as you go on, so you don't have to fight the fat guys 1,000 times. Although you do fight those guys, they show up a lot. There's 8 bosses in the game, which is it's a goodly amount of bosses to have to fight. The game is, like I said, it spans a lot of different areas, which it's just fun. And you'll go across rivers, and like I said, there's jungles and whatnot. So overall, if you look at the evolution of the Final Fight engine, which I mean, that's what this is effectively, right? This is near the top of the peak. I would put this. I like this more than Alien vs. Predator, but they're very similar, and they're very close. It's really sort of what you have an affinity for. A lot of people compare these to the Konami fighting, beat 'em ups like your Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, your Cowboys of Moo Mesa, X-Men, stuff like that. I think those games are good. They're very good. I think these are on par. I mean, they're really both pretty nice. It really depends on what you like, but I think you can sort of get away with both. So I don't really put one ahead of the other. The sound in this is good. The bad guys will talk to you. They shout stuff. There's really good music going on and stuff. So then it changes up when something tense happens. There's also a timer. We should mention that. If you take too long, you basically lose that round. You only get 2 men to start, at least on default, which I don't like that. This game you need, and I will say this thing was built to take quarters.
That's right. That's why it was made.
And at the end of this game, it will take all your money because it is brutal. So, did you know, Boat, that this is actually based on a comic strip?
No.
It was. There was a comic strip published by Dark Horse called Xenozoic Tales. That rolls off the tongue. And it was also later sort of relabeled as Cadillacs and Dinosaurs. It came out in February of '87, and it ran until October of '96. And it was created by a fellow and written by a guy named Mark Schultz. Now, I've never read the comics.
That's surprising.
Yeah, I didn't read all that Dark Horse. Plus, that's about when I was not into comics, right? Well, that's not true. I knew of it. Let's put it that way. But at the time, it didn't appeal to me that much. I mean, I knew of it. I didn't pick up a lot of stuff. Also, this was a short-lived animated series, which I did not know that, on Fox. This ran for a season. I think it was like 14 episodes. Now, I've not watched them, but I might let the kid watch them because he likes the game an awful lot. It reminds me an awful lot of the Konami Cowboys of Moo Mesa, if you have ever played that one, in that it was a wacky idea for a fighting game that was based on a short-lived show. I mean, if you think about the properties that both Konami and Capcom bought here, Cowboys of Moo Mesa, have you ever heard of that aside from the game? Did you know that was a cartoon?
Yeah, I remember that cartoon more, probably
really?
just because of the name.
Yeah, and I would have never guessed. I figured it was based on something, but I didn't know what. And the same with this one. It's sort of obscure. It's funny. I guess they took a chance. Mm-hmm. Like, we're going to see if this pans out, and we'll see what happens. And apparently, they still occasionally will do something with this. There was also a console, I don't want to say sequel, but there was a console game that was based on the same property, Cadillacs and Dinosaurs. I've not played it, but I read that it wasn't in the beat 'em up style. It was something else. But overall, as far as these games go, this is one of our favorites. It's certainly one of my kids' favorites. My kid gradually we started with Golden Axe, Altered Beast. Then we played Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, and we slowly went up the scale of complexity, and this is where we ended up eventually. We got through this one. That was the first time I really sat down and played it. I kind of dug it. So overall, your thoughts?
This is one of the best looking, really arcade games, that I've ever played. Everything is very well animated. I thought the backgrounds really came alive. I think that everything moves really smoothly, and there's not a lot of slowdown. There's not a lot of flicker. The engine, like you talked about, I actually prefer this to the Konami engine. I think that this is a better put-together game than, say, The Simpsons or Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. I realize those games have their fans, but I wonder how much of that is tied to the licenses. I think that this game... it held my attention all the way through. I never felt like I was just, banging my way through another level. It does get, like you said, incredibly hard towards the end of the game, but it's supposed to because it's supposed to take your quarters. That didn't bother me. I just pushed select and hit start. And so
this is perfect for the home.
Yeah. But the one downside, the one aspect of this game that I didn't think was great was that they really sell the Cadillacs part of the title short. That seemed to be like just one tiny part of the game. Yeah,
you're right. And I will say one other thing that I don't enjoy as a father, as just a schmuck, I don't mind, but as a father playing this with a kid, there's a couple parts of this that are pretty violent, particularly the butcher part where he's butchering that thing. I know we keep talking about that, but it's very memorable. It happens pretty early in the game. They do some pretty heinous stuff to these dinosaurs, and some of the stuff in the lab's kind of sketchy for a kid. There's one great scene. I hate to not. There's really two really amusing things they do with the dinosaur idea. There's one scene where there's like a T-Rex asleep, and as you walk past him, you see the little sleep Z's coming out, and the bad guys will come up and try to punch him because they want to wake him up. And if you crash them and destroy them before they get to it, you can tiptoe past this thing without waking them up, which I thought that was funny. And then another thing I like, there's a scene where you walk under this, well, I guess it's like a brontosaurus or something. All you see are his feet. And there's a shadow from where his foot, he's trying to stomp on you. And he also stomp on the bad guys. And you've got to sort of maneuver out of the way of these feet as they come stomping down. I thought that was pretty clever, too.
Yeah.
So it's not just going around and beating stuff up. They're actually using some pretty clever gimmicks in it.
I loved it.
Great. I'm glad to hear that. Have you played this one before, John?
No, but it's It's really neat.
Have you ever heard the
I'm
comment?
watching it here. No.
Well, I would give it a shot. I think it's a fun one. So that's Cadillacs and Dinosaurs. If you're into beat 'em ups, throw some coinage on this thing and give it a whirl. By the way, FYI, I never saw this in the arcade, so I'm guessing you didn't either.
This is I went through and found a picture of the cab for the purposes of this show.
Yeah.
The cab is one of the ugliest things I've ever seen in my life. It's painted like sort of a sky blue. There's no side art, and this is the official cab. I mean, there's multiple pictures of this thing.
Yeah.
With the marquee on top, but there's no control panel overlay. You could tell that we were reaching the end of the arcades, and they were just kind of, putting these things out the door to try and get money.
Well, I will say this: the cabinets were less elaborate. I mean, if you think about stuff like the Tron cabinets, or
even Space Invaders or something like that.
I mean, Space Invaders or even stuff like Asteroids. I mean, where they tried their best to put like mirrors and they did everything they could.
They made cabinets were a work of art in the early '80s, and by the time we get to the early '90s, they just were a commodity.
I can't deny that.
Yeah.
I can't deny that. So, Bo, what do you got for us this week?
All right, this week we're actually going to talk about 4 different games.
Buckle up.
So the game, the sort of the center of this is Do Run Run. But before we get to Do Run Run, I'd like to take you through the entire Mr. Do franchise. And so we'll start with the original Mr. Do. Mr. Do was released in 1982 by Universal. And Universal was a Japanese development house that released over how many games would you estimate Universal released?
12?
See, I thought the same thing. They released over 50 games.
Really?
Yeah.
Well, no, I would never have guessed that.
Now, they released these games in sort of the dark period of arcade games in the late 70s, when there were still a lot of black and white games that nobody collects and nobody really knows anything about. And so, but they released over 50 titles, the most famous in the US being Space Panic, Ladybug, and the Mr. Do series. They also released a Laserdisc game. Did you know that?
Yeah, I did. What was it? That seems like I did know that.
Super Don Quixote.
Yeah, I've played Super Don Quixote on Daphne. It's interesting.
Okay, I have not played it.
Yeah.
I have not played it, but I thought that was interesting. So they went out of business in '85. The reason is not really given, but their assets were bought by a company called Electrocoin, and they continued to make updated versions of their arcade games. So you can play a Mr. Do that's got the Electrocoin on it that might have bug fixes or graphical changes, things like that.
They went on in 85, huh?
85.
So they were short-lived, really, in the arcade scene.
From what I can tell, their downfall came from Laserdisc titles. It seems like they invested a whole bunch of money into what they call the Universal Laserdisc system, where they were going to start pumping out one title a month or something like that. And when the Laserdisc fad sort of petered out, they were left holding the bag.
That's a bummer.
Yeah.
What a way to go, after all those good arcade games.
So the original Mr. Do game, in all of Mr. Do games, Mr. Do, who is he? He's a clown. He's a clown, and what you do is you burrow through a sort of garden environment. You collect cherries while avoiding enemies. It's played on a single screen, top-down, Pac-Man style view. This game is very similar to Dig Dug. If you combine sort of Dig Dug with Pac-Man, you get kind of what Mr. Do is all about. However, Mr. Do has a unique offensive weapon. He has the ball, the magical ball, and when you throw the ball, it travels through all of the paths that you've created or that your enemies have created in the level. And so you can actually, and it won't stop until it either comes back to you or hits an enemy. So it can go around and around and around, which can be a good thing or a bad thing. The ball, if you hit an enemy, you have to wait for a little bit, and then the ball will just magically reappear in Mr. Do's hands.
Magic.
Yeah. And there's also apples on the playfield. So this is sort of a, what's the game with the rocks? Boulder Dash. It's got a Boulder Dash element to it, where if you go underneath a rock, or if you go underneath an apple, the apple will fall down behind you, and you can also use that to either create a block to the path so your enemies can't get through it as easily, or you can crush your enemies using the apples. A hallmark of the Mr. Do series in most of the Universal games is the ability to get an extra life by spelling the word extra In Mr. Do, the extra letters take the form of moving enemies that appear when you eat the cake that's in the middle of each level. So just like in Ladybug, which we talked about a couple weeks ago, once all the monsters sort of vacate the center area, you're left behind with this piece of cake.
You get a goodie.
Yeah. And so if you eat that cake, then the action stops on the playfield, and a letter that's a personification of a monster letter walks out with his guardians. There's 3 or 4 guys that come out before him, and if you destroy the letter monster, then you've gotten that letter to spell out extra.
And his buddies all turn to apples.
That's right. Now you can destroy the baddies one by one, but that doesn't get you anything. But if you destroy the letter baddie, then all the other guys, just like Aaron said, turn to apples, and hopefully they crush a whole bunch of monsters, and a good time's had by all. So how do you complete a stage in Mr. Do? All you have to do is collect all the cherries or defeat all the monsters, and it's the levels over.
Or there's one more way.
What's the other way? Oh, where you're going to talk about the diamond? I want to talk about the diamond later on. So that is Mr. Do. Aaron, what are your thoughts about the Mr. Do game?
The original Mr. Do is one of my favorite arcade games. And if you told me back when it came out that it'd be I'd be like, nah. I was like you said, oh, this is a Dig Dug ripoff or whatever. And on the surface, it looks like a Dig Dug ripoff, but really, it's not anything like Dig Dug, except that you smash stuff and dig through dirt. It is so... it's so abstract in a weird way. It is way more than the sum. It's the sum of its parts plus. I mean, is there a little Pac-Man in there? Yes. Is there a little Dig Dug in there? Yes. Is there a little Boulder Dash in there? Yes. But I mean, it is really its own. It borrows all the best things from games and makes them into something that's great. Mm-hmm. I fell in love with this title when I had the MAME cabinet. I mean, we would have high score battles, and at one point I was a pretty decent hand. But I noticed a lot of these old games, you really lose it quick when you don't play them for a while. And I went back and played this one, which I still play it on and off. But boy, if you don't play it a lot, I'll lose it. And I didn't have as good a games as I used to. But man, it's a lot of fun. It can be frustrating. If you're a newcomer, you can easily give up. I mean, this is not an easy game. The magic ball is a lot like in the Cadillacs and Dinosaurs using your ultra weapon. You really want to use it defensively because it's such a crappy weapon. Mm-hmm. It just goes randomly off somewhere. So unless you have a straight shot, you don't want to just throw that thing and launch it because you'd be boned.
Right.
But I love it. I love this game. I love the quirkiness of it. I like the crazy intermission screens. I like the art. I like the color scheme. I just like everything about it. It's just a beautiful, perfect game. Just one of my all-time favorites.
Awesome.
I got nothing bad to say about it.
I discovered this game on a disc full of copied software on the Atari computer. You know how when you get a copy disc, sometimes you would see they would make sort of a custom loading screen where it said press 1 to play this game, press 2 to play this game. Well, I was just randomly going through discs, and I discovered that if you go in through DOS, sometimes there were games that were on there that weren't on the custom loading screen, and this was one of those games. So I typed in MrDo.exe and hit return, and I was like, wow, this game looks awesome. And the Atari 8-bit version is a pretty faithful port. It's one of the better ports of this game. This game also had a release on the Super Nintendo. Oddly enough, it's a very strange thing how this appeared on the Super Nintendo. It's the only Mr. Do game to appear on the Super Nintendo, and there was a version for the Neo Geo called Neo Mr. Do, which is an affront to God and man, and I won't say anything else about it.
It's not that bad. Now, stop me if I'm wrong here, Boatster, but I believe on the Super Nintendo version you can have 2 players simultaneous play.
Really?
Yeah.
Okay, I have not played the Super Nintendo version with 2 players before.
I think you can. I think it's the only version that, I don't know, Neo Do might do it as well. Neo Do's unusual, rethinking, reimagining of it.
It's no good. John, have you played Mr. Do at all?
I didn't even know about the series until you guys covered it.
Really?
Oh, okay.
Oh, well, you need to, we just give you a gift, John. You need to look into it.
All right, well, we're going to go ahead and move on to the next game in the Do series. This is Mr. Do's Castle. So, Mr. Do's Castle arrived... Actually, I didn't write anything about Mr. Do's Castle because I remember that you were going to talk about it.
Well, I will talk about Mr. Do's Castle. Now, I like to say much...
83. It arrived in 83, a year after the
game... the Mr. Do's Castle is totally different than Mr. Do in almost every way. But it gets away with murder because it retains what made Mr. Do fun. You've got the crazy little clown, and you basically in this one you go around and you try to whack these blocks out of various platforms, right? And some of the blocks are cherries, and some of them are keys. And when you whack all the keys, a door at the top of the screen opens up. You can get, basically, it's like a power pill, effectively, and it turns every monster that's up on the screen into a letter. And you can go as quick as you can, try to bonk as many as you can or drop stuff on them. But in this one, effectively, to end the level, you have to destroy all the monsters or get all the cherries, which you never do because this game's a lot harder to get around. This game has even a steeper learning curve than Mr. Do. It is a very difficult game, and for the uninitiated, it's almost impossible, which it baffles me that this got released. I mean, in all honesty, this, as far as these sorts of games go, this is near the top of the heap. Really, all the Mr. Do games are like this in a lot of ways. It's an abstract game. One of the methods to get around in this, there are these little staircases, and if you bump them once you get to the top, they will basically tilt to the another platform beside you, and it's a good way to get bad guys off your butt. There are also platforms that have these blocks in it that have skulls on them, and if you hit one skull, hit all the cherries between the one skull and the other skull, and get monsters caught in it. When you hit the other skull, all the monsters will fall down the next level and die. And this is a very basic explanation of the game because there are nuances and stuff, much like Mr. Do, that were for point getting. If you knock a monster down through more than one block, you get extra points. You can knock it down through 2, 3 blocks. If you get a bunch of monsters at once, you get points. So there are a lot of aspects to it that are tough to explain and even tougher to master. But it's a great game. Another game we found, me and my buddy Chad went through a phase where we were just trying new games. And we had never wanted to play this because it was so hard. So we were trying to one-up each other on this hard game. And and we became addicted to it. And I still play it to this day. It's a great game, but very challenging. What do you think about it, Bo?
This one is the odd one out for me. I don't count Mr. Do's Castle Mr. Do's Wild Ride because that one is so much different. But I do consider this to be part of the Mr. Do canon, but it is not the same game at all as Mr. Do or Do Run Run. This game reminds me a lot of Burger Time because you're constantly climbing ladders, moving to different platforms, and trying to knock enemies down. It's also hard like Burger Time. This game is not one that you can... Mr. Do, it's immediately apparent what you need to do. You need to collect the cherries. In this game, you really don't know what to do at the beginning. You got this hammer and you can hit things, but there's no clear goal. And you're thinking, well, there's a couple keys. Maybe if I go up and knock off, destroy all the keys, I can go through that door and go to the next level. Nope, that's not how it works.
I watched you play this on the stream, and I cackled with delight as you were trying to escape because there is no escape from Mr. Do's Castle except through obliteration of the enemy.
Now, that said, I can understand how this game can be a very rewarding experience to those who take the time to really learn it.
Yes, which I guess most difficult arcade games are like that. But I mean, if you want a real, and another one, much like the original Do, this is a very abstract game, and how you play it is going to vary between the various people that play the game. It's not like a lock and chase. It could be like that, or a ladybug. It could be a lot like those if you want it to be. It depends on how you want to play it. If you just want to go through and get all the cherries, that's an angle you can play. If you want to go through and kill the monsters as quick as you can, that's another angle. In this one, if you could spell out extra by hitting that power pill that's in the doors and then whacking guys when they turn the letters. Some people go that route. I'll try to keep a lot of the monsters alive and have them group at the top. And so when I hit that, I can go whack them real quick. Is that the best strategy? I don't know. But I mean, there's a lot of different ways to play it. And the clown looks good. The monsters are cute. This is sort of like the monsters in this are the cutest of the bunch, I think, of all the Do games. This sort of reminds me almost of like a Liquid Kids or a Bubble Bobble. They're cute monster games, as opposed to they look a lot meaner in the first game than they do in this one. Big chompy guys in the first one are scary.
And it's worth noting that this game in other regions was actually called Mr. Do versus Unicorns.
Which I don't, but there are unicorns in this. Yeah,
I mean the monsters all have that horn.
Yeah,
That's
it's
what they are.
I like Mr. Doo's Castle though, that is the name personally, but I do. I can see what it's not for everyone. It's
Right.
not, but I mean, I enjoyed it.
You know, I originally was going to set up my marquees here in the front of the table.
Yeah.
And but I didn't. So.
So that's a separate video. You can just have all the marquees out.
Well, I was going to put because I've got the castle and wild ride right there, but you can if you look beside Aaron on the video, you can see them hanging out there by the fireplace. All right, moving on. So we turn now to 1984, a very good year, and it's time for Mr. Doo's next adventure, Mr. Doo's Wild Ride. Now, this is a very bizarre title because in a Super Mario Brothers 2-like turn, Mr. Doo's Wild Ride was not originally a Mr. Doo game.
Really?
Yeah, it was
Okay.
a game. It was a game called Go Go Coaster. It had nothing to do with Mr. Doo. It was a different guy
That
in it.
explains a lot, Boat.
Yeah, but they decided, hey, we need a game. We need a new Doo game, and so they put Mr. Doo in it. This game is much different than the first two. In that you start at the bottom of each screen. You don't have to collect any cherries if you don't want to. You're basically just trying to make it to the top of a roller coaster. In your way, there are cars that are in your way. There's a roller coaster that's actually in operation that you must avoid.
Yeah.
There are balls. There's spheres that sort of go back and forth in an odd way.
What are they? Why are they on the coaster, Boat?
Yeah, I have no idea. In later levels, there's a pirate ship that floats in midair that impedes your progress. So this is a very, very strange game. The way that you spell extra, because there really aren't any enemies to defeat in this game, is that it's just all a time bonus thing. So if you get there really soon, you're going to be spelling E. If not, X, and go on down the line. So this game is really, really strange. It's a pretty game. I like the way it looks, but this is definitely the weak link in the Mr. Doo chain for me. I have never completed the second level, and I've only completed the first level a couple times. It's very infuriating because it's a waiting game. This is a big reason why I don't like Donkey Kong, because it's very similar, except instead of barrels coming down that you got to wait, you got to climb up a ladder and wait for them to go under you. Now you're waiting for the roller coaster. The thing that makes this even worse than Donkey Kong is that you don't have a jump, so you've got to locate a ladder and go up the ladder and wait around. You can depress the button and gain a speed boost, and that is a small help. But overall, this is not my favorite Mr. Doo game. In fact, this is my least favorite. What do you think about this one, Aaron?
Until you told me what we were doing here this week, I had given this a passing glance at best, because I never knew exactly what in the hell was going on. It is a chaotic, crazy game. That said, I did spend some time this week trying to get to know this game. When you tell me it's not a Mr. Doo game, it makes sense, because in Mr. Doo games, there's a way to be offensive. In this game, you're pretty much just avoiding everything. The speed boost doesn't do much. It took me forever just to figure out what to do. I didn't want to read anything. I was like, I'm going to figure this out. And you're right, getting to the top of the coaster, but the coaster is in this weird twist. And so I didn't know. I was like, how do you get up the hill?
It's sort of
here?
like an MC Escher.
It is very Escher-like. And so when I got to the top, I literally stood up and cheered. I was so happy to get there. And then I ended up playing, I got a couple levels in.
So you actually beat one of the levels that had the pirate ship on it.
Yes.
Wow.
One time. And it's really a hard game, too. And the fact that you can't jump and you have no ball, you can't jump, you've got no hand.
We're watching the playthrough right now. We're on a stage now that I have never seen.
Yeah,
This is scene 5. This is crazy. You got these horses. So I guess you're going through a circus. It's kind of got a little Circus Charlie vibe to it. But yeah, I cannot imagine being able to play this thing without hours and hours of practice.
Yeah, I will say, telling me that there's not a Doo connection, this is the most un-Doo-like of all the games. And by the way, they're unlike the other games where I bet they strapped the extra onto this one, number one. And number two, in the other games, there are various methods of playing. That's what is the hallmark of the series. This one, unless it's above me, all you're doing is avoiding.
That's right.
It's like, I mean, I don't know if it would insult Donkey Kong by comparing the two, but I can see where you're coming from.
Well, it's funny that you mentioned that, because this game was cloned for the Commodore 64 and the ZX Spectrum as Kong strikes back.
Well, some of the levels, as I'm looking at them, because I mean, I never got any of these places. If you've gotten to the what is it, the fourth level of Donkey Kong Jr., where you're avoiding this stuff these sparks that are coming down and these platforms, it's sort of, I can sort of see a similarity there. But man, this game is, I don't know how this did in the arcade, but I'm guessing it was a El Flapo Grande.
Yeah, and these games are notable because I think aside from the original Mr. Do, all of the sequels were only available as conversion kits. And that was sort of a new thing at this time. You know, there weren't a whole lot of sequels coming out, you know, and it was a money-saving measure. All of these games predate JAMA, so there are lots of Mr. Do to JAMA adapters available on eBay. But
conversion kits were quite popular before they adopted a standard, because you could use those same cabinets over and over, and the games people would get bored of and put a new one in cheap.
Right. And now we move to the final game in the Do series. This is Do Run Run. Do Run Run was Mr. Do's second game of 1984. There's not too many arcade titles where you have two come out in 1 year.
Maybe when they licensed the first one, they're like, well, let's go ahead and write another one.
Right.
You have it standing by.
Right. And I'd say that this is the truest sequel to the original. This one shares the most aspects of the original Mr. Do of any of the four. So in this game, Mr. Do, you're running around various, I call them pseudo 3D environments, and that there are raised levels and lower levels.
Right.
And you're collecting dots. You're avoiding or destroying bad guys. This, you know, when you think about it, just from that standpoint, it seems like a Pac-Man clone. You run around, you eat dots, you avoid the bad guys. But there are several aspects of this that make it different. One, the maze, there's no maze. It's entirely an open field. You can go anywhere on the screen. Two, this game incorporates aspects of kicks, where, you know, in kicks you're trying to make squares that are worth points. Well, in this, as you travel and you collect these dots, you leave behind a white line, sort of like if you've ever lined a football field. You got this thing and you're leaving behind a white line. And so if you completely encircle some dots with that white square, then they will change point value and also change form. They'll turn into various types of fruit. So that's cool. That's a way that you can jack up your score. You've still got the ball. The way the ball works in this game is that it travels in a straight line from wherever you shoot it. And it will bounce, when it reaches the end of the screen, it will bounce back like a wrestler running the ropes. It'll keep going back and forth. And the more times that it bounces back and forth on the screen before it hits an enemy, the more points it's worth when it finally does hit.
I didn't even know that.
Yeah, so that is one of the best ways to run up a really high score. That's another thing that's different. I think in the original Mr. Do, there was a set time when your ball reappeared. In this game, your ball will slowly start to emerge from the amount of dots or fruit that you collect, and you can actually see it slowly forming in your hands as you collect more and more dots or fruit. The way that you complete a level is you can either collect all of the dots or fruit in the level, and that will end the level, or you can destroy all of the enemies. There's one other aspect of this game where instead of apples as in the first game, in this game you actually have rolling logs that are set up, and they've got a little stopper. Once you run underneath the log, the log will roll down and destroy any enemies or yourself if you manage to find yourself trapped under there. Spelling extra is very similar to the first game, but you have more control over what letter you want. Every once in a while, and this is dependent on the type of fruit, you know, how many squares you make around things, you'll get a flashing cursor on the field that will spell either EXT or A. If you run over that triggers the monster coming down from the top, very similar to the first game, and you can destroy it to collect the letter. Just like the first game, but this game actually, I prefer it. You get a little cutscene where you know, all the extra letters run into a house, and then your extra Mr. Do runs out of the other side of the house. I think it's really cool. So that is really the game in a nutshell. However, one aspect that I didn't mention in the first game that's also made an appearance in this game is that once in a very, very, very long time, depending on your dip switch settings, you will get a diamond. A diamond will appear on the playfield, and if you collect this diamond, it's worth 10,000 points, and you are immediately transported to the next level. This has probably happened to me maybe 4 or 5 times in the countless games I've played of these games.
I've never had it happen to me in this. I've had it happen in Mr. Do many times. In fact, when I set the high score on our machine back in the day, it was because I'd gotten the diamond. Chad was furious at that. I laughed. You're right. This game has a lot more in common with the first game than any of the other games do. That said, also like the first game, this is a real abstract. You can go and just kill stuff. You could try to farm that fruit with the line, the kicks line you've got coming out. This game has elements of kicks. It has elements of Mr. Doom. It sort of reminds me an awful lot of Crystal Castles, where the elements of collecting all the dots, like in Crystal Castles, in a 3D environment. Except this is controllable, unlike Crystal Castles, which I can never control that because of the trackball. This game is not my favorite. Mr. Do, and I prefer Mr. Do and Mr. Do's Castle more, but this is much like the first one, and it's still a good game. And the more I play it, the more I enjoy it. It's a tough game as well. I mean, it's you're basically, like you said, you're out in an expanse. There are monsters, and they just are going to come get you. And you got to go, and This is a tough one to try to understand the method of play. I mean, really, if it was just going around collecting the dots, this game wouldn't know, and we wouldn't care about it anymore. But the aspect of making the rings around the dots and upgrading basically effectively growing them to something else, it adds a lot to it. The monsters are fun. I love extra. I love everything about that. The music's wacky in it, which I like. It fits it. The ball thing I didn't know about, but that's cool. I didn't know about the point multiplier. That's pretty neat. Fun game. It's really with the exception of Mr. Do's Wild Ride, all the Do games have their pluses and minuses, and I think this one is right up there. And again, it's another game where you have to sit down and tell yourself, "I'm going to play this game for an hour." Or whatever, and just sit there and get killed over and over until you understand the concepts behind how things move. The trying to understand the concept of how to lasso those dots is tricky.
Yeah.
I mean, that's the hardest thing for me, is to understand how am I going to get these points. If you don't go for points and just try to survive, you've got a better chance, probably. But sometimes, like the lines, whether you want them or not, you got them, and sometimes stuff will appear on them and slink out and hit you real quick, and so you've got to be prepared for that. So tricky. It's a tricky game. To me, this is probably the second hardest of the four behind Mr. Do's Wild Ride. I mean, it's a tough game.
Yeah. This is my favorite arcade game of all time, so I obviously love it. There are things about it that the things that I like are that it's got a tremendous amount of variety in how you want to play it. You can make. I've tried to get all pineapples, which is you got to encircle everything like 6 times to finally upgrade it to the highest level. And the key to getting a high score is a combination of being mindful of your squares and always trying to upgrade that while destroying the monsters, because the longer you stay on a level, the faster the monsters get, and they'll eventually catch up to you.
Yes, and the monsters they'll come after you. They're not just out there milling around.
Yeah, they're very aggressive. Yeah. So I looked up a couple of these on eBay. I looked at Mr. Do. It's really, really difficult to find a Mr. Do original in an original Universal cab. The Universal cabs are very distinctive. They're very cool looking, and I couldn't find any that had recently come up. I did find a conversion cab that somebody had up for $895, which I think is crazy, and I don't think it's going to sell, but people, you never know with the arcade scene. I did find some PCBs. You can get a Mr. Do's Castle PCB for around $70. You can get Mr. Do's Wild Ride, one sold conversion kit. The whole kit sold for under $150. It was a best offer accepted deal. And then Mr. Do's Wild Ride machine, which was a conversion, that sold for only $200. So
I should mention, since I didn't go into the eBay aspect of mine, there's a reason why. the Capcom board that Cadillacs and Dinosaurs came on had the patented Capcom suicide battery on it. And what that basically means is after that battery runs out, a small portion of the data on the board is erased, and the board is useless. Now, this was death until a few years ago where someone figured out a way around it. But the board worth is real hard to judge, and I just saw prices that were so far over the map, and when you're buying these boards, it really helps to be hands-on because you're going to want to see what you're getting. You could get screwed very easily on one of these Capcom boards with the suicide battery issue. So that's one where you really want to do a lot of. It's not for a newcomer getting into arcade collecting, that's for sure.
Right. So it's time for the high score challenge.
All right, I've got to make sure I've got the right score. So tell me your score so I can know exactly what I'm looking at
My
here.
score for Cadillacs and Dinosaurs was 243,400.
Okay, let me beam back here on the Gambletron, all the way back. Here it is. My score was 245,600.
Oh, wow, very close.
Yes, and
Very
what'd you say
close.
yours was?
243,400.
Oh, that is a tragedy. Let me guess. You got to the butcher.
I did. I did.
The butcher is a butcher. He's a real scumbag.
Okay, do run score.
All right, what you got?
Now, I limited myself to only playing this a couple times because I
Okay.
didn't want to totally destroy you.
Oh, great. Thanks.
149,520.
You totally destroyed me. 27,800.
Oh my gosh. I've scored over 300,000 on this game.
Yeah, you mashed me on
But like I said, it's my favorite game.
Hey,
They were
no
very
matter
few
how
games,
close or
so.
far away the scores were, we both won one. That's the important thing.
That's right. All right, Aaron, it's time for the retro roulette.
Should we let our guests spin it this week?
Well, no, because there's a special way I've got to do it.
What does that mean?
I'm just kidding, John.
I guess I got drank all that.
Hey, it was never concerned that wouldn't be empty.
You would have broken the golden rule.
John, you might want to de-mic. All right. And when you spin this thing, really give it a good spin.
What do we add this week, Bo? By the
So
way?
we've added. I don't even know. We've got the BBC Micro on here. We got the Apple II. And again, we have those 3 chat choice spaces. So
chat?
get ready. There's a Super Nintendo, BBC Micro, Odyssey 2, Vectrex, Amstrad CPC, Apple II, and ZX Spectrum.
What?
If it shows up as the chat choice, you all will do a quick poll in the chat, and you can tell us what you want.
It's crazy. There's some crazy choices on there.
All right.
Spin the wheel. Make the deal. There it is. I can't see it, so you have to tell me what we got.
And it is chat choice.
Uh-oh.
Chat choice.
It's the first time chat choices came up, so you, the chat room, will get to pick a system from amongst the ones on the wheel. I will grab the envelopes of certain doom.
All right, the winner is, thanks to Paul,
Pippin.
Dan Ross, and Pixels at Dawn. They all voted for the ZX Spectrum.
All right, I've got I anticipated this. I've got the envelope for the ZX Spectrum right here in my hand. And we're going to see what we got. And I honestly don't remember what I picked on here, do you? All right, so Boat, here's yours. All right, and I think your turn to pick first this week.
All right, we will be playing School Days.
Okay, and I'm going to pick, let's see here. I'm just going to go in the order that I wrote these down. And I have no idea, by the way, on what this game is, so don't mock me. I'm picking Death Chase.
All right, Death Chase and School Days it is.
Death Chase. That's my kind of game. You ever played Death Chase, dude? All right.
All right, guys. Well, thank you, as always, for listening. ARG Presents is released every Wednesday, and we do record live on YouTube, so make sure and check us out live if you can. I want to thank Pixels at Dawn, UK Retro Gamer, Duncan Styles, Jonas Rulo, Steve Rasmussen, Dan Ross, Paul Harrington, Pixels at Dawn, Duncan Styles, anybody else, Eric Sundstrom that I missed. Thank you so much for hanging out with us. Aaron, you want to take us home?
We should, while we're here, mention that if you'd like to support us on Patreon, we'd be more than happy to accept your Patreon donation. Bo, what's our Patreon address?
Patreon.com/Amigos Podcast.
And we've got various levels in there, including one that gets you on our Discord chat, which is outstanding. We enjoy that every week, don't we, Bo?
We sure do.
And I guess that's all we've got. Anything to add, John? Thanks for coming in and sitting in. And I guess until next week, adios.
Aaron and John making a new podcast.